They're still working on it, but I'm going to go ahead and introduce them, because they already hopefully know who they are, right? Right, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce you guys.
This sounds like a plan.
This is Naomi.
Hi.
And this is Gavin. And I'm going to read this because you wouldn't want to hear the things that I would announce them. Oh, maybe you would? I have had more than a joy and pleasure to work with both of these people in my lifetime and continue to do so. But Naomi and I began on the same day, January 4th, 2010. I can even tell you that.
Know each other that long?
That long. And we were hired at Haven for Hope. And boy, we could have a session on that.
That would be another workshop.
That'd be another workshop, but we started the same day there. I stayed there for 7 years.
I did too.
What you
7 years.
Yeah. So anyway,
That's perfect.
it was, yeah, it really was a good place to be, and I learned a lot about life. And Gavin, I don't know, like we just ran into each other. Oh, I remember how I met him. He was, let's see, I have to think the right word, an undercover agent. He snuck into the courtyard at Haven for Hope. He spent 40 days there during Lent, and no one knew that he was just hanging out to find out what was happening over there. And he started to write reflections that he put up online, and that's how I met him. I read the online version, right? And I'm like, who is this guy who would do that as his Lenten practice? And just the insights, the things that he's willing to do 24 hours a day for a greater good and a better world. I don't know when he sleeps, because every once in a while I'll get like a text at 2, okay, something like that, what, man, I'm sleeping here, but he's, works over at Corazon Ministries now at Grace Lutheran Church, and works with folks who don't have permanent shelter in their lives. So you can also see my early connection with both of these. We're around people who don't have permanent shelter. So that's where their hearts are. So should I read these things, or are you guys done?
We're good.
You're good.
You don't
You don't have to go that far.
Yeah.
We're done, actually. Was that great?
You guys are ready?
All right, I'm going to read this fast. So I'm going to learn a lot. The last set of bios, I'm like, we should hand out bios to each other when we meet people. I mean, I've known people for years, and I read some things in their bios I wish I had known. Really? All those years. Naomi Brown, chair of the center, Pride Center, San Antonio, and director of clinical services and a licensed clinical master's level social worker with over 20 years of experience in social services and a psychotherapist in private practice. Reverend Naomi is community outreach minister at Metropolitan Community Church. She's currently a member of the Mayor's LGBTQ Advisory Board. Naomi is a national recognized presenter and trainer in creating safe zones for LGBTQI folks and using CI's privilege to be a trans ally. Naomi has taught safe zone training to over 3,000 participants, including quarterly training with the San Antonio Police Department. I didn't know that. Naomi has worked nationally recognized SAGE, Senior Action and a Gay Environment Trainer, and an Alzheimer's caregiver support group facilitator specializing in LGBTQ audiences. Naomi is a certified diversity, inclusion, and equity professional. In addition, she has passion for spoken word. She co-facilitates and co-founded the Center's Core Voices, and she is a published poet. She's married to her college sweetheart, and they've been together over 1 million years. I didn't know that. And then there's Gavin. Gavin Rogers is executive director at Corazon San Antonio, a local nonprofit for the unhoused and marginalized. He also serves as the associate pastor at Travis Park Church in downtown San Antonio. He's the founder of the interfaith community group, there's a joke behind that, by the way, community group of Theology San Antonio. He is a native Texan and is a graduate of the Divinity School at Duke. In 2013, he was selected as the Young San Antonian of the Year for his work of solidarity with the homeless, where he lived in the streets of San Antonio for Lent. This award has been given to one San Antonio each year since 1931.
They're crazy that they picked it.
I got goosebumps on that. In 2018, Gavin traveled with the Migrant Caravan to better understand the immigration issue and learn the personal stories of migrants. His work can be found on CNN, NPR, San Antonio Report, and the San Antonio Express News. Gavin's mission is to engage the community to seek unconditional love and justice and action to all of our neighbors. I get to share my dear friends with you today. Thank you both.
So I would be remiss if I did not introduce myself by my pronouns, which are she and they. And I spend a lot of time with queer young folk. And when you spend a lot of time with queer young folk, you create a existence which I think is a little bit different. So here's some things that are gonna come out real quickly. I'm from New York, slow me down, okay? I don't need this mic, I'm also a preacher. So these are a lot of things that if we get them out in the beginning, when I am like speeding along and y'all go, what the hell did she just say? You'll go, New York, and I'll get it. I will, I promise. So Gavin and I are, we laugh because I feel like, you know, I come in, I am not your average therapist, but I come in with blue hair and my personality just kind of shines through. Any of you think I'm shrinking violet? No, right? So they put me with Gavin, and I'm like, Gavin, do they know that they just really created danger without even knowing it? I was like, no, Gavin doesn't calm me down. He actually makes me worse. So we laugh because it's like we're both these social justice advocates. But when we talk about working in the LGBTQ community, as a queer Black woman, I get really excited. And I want everyone to have the tools they need to work in my community, but also to acknowledge that there is a reverend in front of my name, which really freaks people out because they're like, okay, yeah, I was 16, I fell in love with my best friend and I got called to preach the same year. So if anybody thinks God doesn't have a sense of humor, get rid of that idea. Okay? I was very confused. I'm like, okay, God, I'm really confused here. But in that position, in that space, I did a Transgender Day of Remembrance where I gave communion to over 50 trans folks who have been disconnected from the church. And as I cried giving communion, letting them know that we were given one new commandment, and that was to love one another. And God was so cool, he didn't put parameters around who one another was. So Gavin and I today are going to try and approach LGBTQ youth and some of the stuff that has happened to them, with them, and around them. A lot of it as a result of COVID, but a lot of it as a result of stuff that existed beforehand, and COVID exacerbated it. So I will speak today as a therapist, but you know it's hard to shut the preacher down. So occasionally the preacher may come out, and we won't be surprised by that at all. And Gavin, who works with houselessness and youth, together we're going to try and pull this off, okay? But again, slow me down, just do something. I don't know what it is, okay? I'll say, oh, I'm speeding along again.
Yeah, and we want this to be interactive in some way, so if you have questions at any time, please make this interactive because we want to share with y'all what y'all want to learn. I will say this, we have about an hour together, an hour and some change. This space and this kind of conversation about LGBT youth or LGBT folk needs to be dominated by those voices, right? And as a cisgender, straight man, white pastor, I need to take about 15 of those comments. And 45 needs to go to voices like Naomi and anybody else in this room that may want to share their experience in mental health. So I think sometimes it's dominated people that look like me and experts that say, this is what you think. But we really want to hear those voices. And And so let's keep that in mind together, because I usually go and speak about homelessness, and we'll speak about migration or immigration. And that's what I've been doing in the past. But for 15 years, I was a youth pastor. From 2000 to 2015, my primary job was a youth pastor. And to see the effects and the damaging effects that oftentimes programs and ideas or theologies or camps would how they would unintentionally or maybe sometimes intentionally harm LGBT folk. Preparing for this has really brought me back to that mindset, to experience that. So we're going to talk about some of this stuff, but I think you're going to introduce this first video.
Yeah. So we wanted to get the COVID stuff out of the way right in the beginning so we can get into the meat of it. So Trevor Project does a great job of working with LGBTQ youth. And we're going to show a video, hopefully we'll see what happens.
It's going to play. We're trying to worry about the sound, but if we can't hear it, we'll figure it out together.
So I know that when I talk into this mic here, it goes into the speaker. So,
We're going to try to make it work.
yeah. Can you use the caption?
We can. It was just playing on my computer, so that's what. Let me see.
So you may or may not see the video.
That's it. There we go. Weird.
45% of LGBTQ youth seriously considered attempting suicide in 2021. That's according to a survey from the Trevor Project, a nonprofit providing crisis support for LGBTQ youth. The organization says it's the third consecutive year that rates of suicidal ideation have increased among LGBTQ youth. For more, Amit Paley joins me now. He's the CEO and Executive Director for the Trevor Project. Amit, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So what were some of the other key findings of this survey?
Well, the findings overall have a lot of very disturbing and frankly heartbreaking news. We've seen over the past few years an upward trend in not just suicidal ideation, but also anxiety and depression among LGBTQ young people. And we see even higher numbers among transgender and non-binary young people and LGBTQ youth of color. And of course, this upward trend, which is very disturbing and upsetting, coincides with a lot of challenging things going on in the world with COVID-19 impacting the mental health of LGBTQ youth, as well as an increasing number of legislative attacks on LGBTQ young people, and especially transgender and non-binary young people.
Now, the survey also mentions that 60% of LGBTQ youth who wanted mental health care in the past year were not able to get it. So what are some of the challenges these young people are facing in gaining access to this care?
Well, in this country, we have, frankly, a broken healthcare system, especially as it relates to mental health care. And for so many people, especially young people, it can be really difficult to acknowledge that you need help and to be brave enough and confident enough to reach out for that help. And what we unfortunately found is that a majority of young people who finally felt the ability and the desire to reach out and get that mental health care couldn't access it. That could be because they were not able to reach mental health care providers. We have a shortage of mental health care providers in this country. It could be because they weren't able to afford it. It could be because they were not able to find culturally competent care. We don't have nearly enough clinicians and other mental health care providers in this country who know how to appropriately serve LGBTQ people, who know how to serve youth of color and other groups that are particularly high risk.
So what more can the government do to provide better protection and representation of LGBTQ youth?
Well, there is a lot that can be done. Unfortunately, we are seeing in many places in this country governments and lawmakers taking, in fact, the wrong steps, taking steps that are harming LGBTQ young people. We need to have more access to mental health care. That is critical. So many young people need and deserve that, and as we just talked about, can't access it. We need the government and people in positions of power to be providing affirming spaces and making sure that they are acting from a place of love and support. Unfortunately, we are seeing state after state taking steps that are harming LGBTQ young people. We've seen states that are trying to prevent trans young people from being able to access the mental health care that their doctors and parents support. We're seeing states and governments trying to prevent trans young people from being able to use the restroom that corresponds with their gender identity or play on sports teams with their parents. And we are seeing government officials trying to ban schools and educators from being able to talk about LGBTQ issues. All these things we know can reduce the risk of suicide if we lead from a place of love and affirmation and acceptance.
What resources would you recommend for LGBTQ youth who may be struggling with their mental health right now?
Well, first of all, LGBTQ young people can always reach out to the Trevor Project. We are available 24/7 with free and confidential support. You can reach a trained counselor via phone, text, or chat, and we have lots of resources on our website. But we also hope that we can get more adults to be coming from a place of support. And that requires adults to step up and to make sure that they are leading from a place of love and acceptance. You know, one of the most powerful pieces of research we have at the Trevor Project is that having just one accepting adult in an LGBTQ young person's life can reduce their risk of suicide by 40%. 40%. That's a huge difference. And I hope everyone watching and listening to this knows you can be that person. Just by being loving and accepting and supportive and being there for LGBTQ young people, you can help reduce the risk of suicide and help save lives.
All right, Amit Paley, important information. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
40%. That's huge. 40%. One person in their life who is affirming. How many of you have your pronouns on your signature line? Why does it matter?
Permission.
Yeah. So pronouns, having something as simple as your pronouns on your signature line to a non-binary or to a person who is working through figuring out their identity gives them the feeling that you could possibly be a safe person. For years I taught say-so training, and just the emblem alone made you, whether they came into your office, whether they said one single word to you, just seeing the emblem let them know that there was a safe space around them. It is so crucially important because we're talking 40%. The ability to save lives is significant. And it's just the affirmation that it's okay, be who you are. So, one of the things that we do a lot when we talk about working in community, and I love this, working in community with LGBTQ youth is acknowledging the fact that you might be the only person who makes them feel safe. One of the things that we saw at the Pride Center, and we do free counseling and case management in the community, and one of the major things we saw as a result of COVID was the fact that, you know, if you were quarantined with a family that did not affirm who you are, that was a living hell for most of our young folks. We saw a lot of decline in folks that have probably were able to hold it together and really start working and becoming who they were, but then they had to spend 6 months with a family who did not acknowledge who they were, who used the wrong pronouns, who used the wrong name, who said, okay, I'm gonna take this as an opportunity for you to get straight. You know, there are still churches all over that are still praying the gay away. It didn't work for me, and it's probably not gonna work for most of the other ones. But it is acknowledging that your existence, that you are a whosoever, your existence as a child of God has nothing to do with your gender identity and sexual orientation. It's actually something that God loves. You know, God loves the fact that we are all different. And Gavin and I were talking yesterday that Jesus hung out with 12 dudes and a prostitute. You know, he probably would not be welcome in most of our churches. You know, but at the same time, we put young people in boxes that they find hard for them to live in. And it increases anxiety, it increases stress, and it increases suicidal ideation, especially for non-binary and gender non-conforming youth. So I am going to,
I have a question for you. They wanted us to really talk about COVID-19, which did increase rates of mental health challenges for LGBT folk, like increases suicide, increases of loneliness, depression. And that probably tracked with probably a lot of us, right? A lot of groups of people, because it heightened everything that already existed. So my question for you is, if it heightened it, if it made it worse, there was underlying conditions before that COVID just illuminated, unfortunately. What are some of the things that existed before COVID that COVID made it worse? I think that's where we want to go, is to figure out what were the things that we were doing that made LGBT folk feel lonely, have higher rates of suicide, increased homelessness. And if that got worse during COVID, that means there was already a problem before COVID. So, what were those things, and how can we work through them together?
so some of the things we look at is disparity in healthcare. How many folks, and we did a survey, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation study 4 years ago now, and we looked at how many folks don't tell their primary care provider their sexual orientation. So if you don't tell your primary care provider, the person who is managing your health care throughout all these systems, your sexual orientation, for fear, and a lot of times it's built on and based on fear. When the legislative session began, I got an influx of families with trans kids, who all of a sudden were fearful that their kids would be snatched away from them. I have 3 kids who went to different states. Families picked up and moved to save the life of their kids. So when we put folks in a situation where they are living in they're living with negativity. They're living in a feeling of always being the other. So I'm always trying to prove I belong. I'm always trying to prove I have value. And I'm always trying to be accepted for who I am. So I'm holding this big secret. So when we make young people, and not just young people, I've got folks that transition at 50. So if you are constantly holding in who you are and you are not sharing that, then it leads to a heightened level of stress. It can increase. What we saw a lot is that because you don't tell your primary care provider your sexual orientation, you may not actually get yearly annuals. So what COVID pointed out was that we had folks who were not going to see a primary care provider. We had young folks that had pre-existing conditions because they were afraid that their provider would find out that they were gay and maybe tell their parents. Does anybody know what the average age of coming out is now? It's actually 11 to 13. It used to be that first or second year of college. We went off to college, we used to get calls all the time. Kids would go off to college, decide to transition, and come home on spring break. Okay, and we had kids, and I would be like, seriously? But now it's 11 to 13, so we spend a lot of time talking to summer camp counselors. Because they will test out who they're going to tell. And it's often somebody who they find that, okay, I'm going to tell my summer camp counselor. One of the things I think is a problem is they can't tell their youth pastor. And that's some of the things that we're trying to change. Because I think the relationship between who they are and whose they are is very close. And as we approach our youth with love and affirmation, we are changing lives. We are changing lives. So some of the disparities we saw was the increased number of houselessness. And I'm going to keep that together.
Yeah. We'll go back to the youth group thing, I promise, because that's something I want to share. And some of the movements that happened in the 90s and 2000s and before that. But when it comes to homelessness and LGBTQ plus individuals, we see a really disparity in homelessness. 40% of the youth facing homelessness identify as being LGBTQ plus. 40% of youth. Weird enough, there are just 7% of LGBTQ youth in the USA, right? So we see a very high rate of homelessness with youth who identify as LGBTQ. And one of the things that's hard to determine is you're expecting to see them on the streets. You're expecting to see them on Houston Street, under bridges, and are they there? Yes. Right? But there are different forms of homelessness that the public sees. You see encampments, you see people on the side of the street maybe asking for donations or asking for help. You might have them in your neighborhoods. Youth, and this is true with all homeless youth, it's not necessarily chronic homelessness yet because they're 16 to 24 years old, right? And they've been kicked out of their home because they can no longer be who they are in their home. They cannot be no longer who they are at their youth group or their church or their place of worship. And so they're forced to live as couch surfers, people who are trying to go into places almost like kind of like hostel living, like in various forms. Some dormitories around town that offer this. There are nonprofits that offer this. But a lot of the times it's hidden in the shadows of people's living rooms, our backyards, or places of safety. So we really don't see it. Like if you're a homeless provider, you may not see it in your daily work, right, on average. And so youth homelessness is increasing on general, regardless of sexual identification. However, the problem of youth becoming homelessness is stemming from not being able to be fully accepted, usually in places where you can escape homelessness, right? Where they're not getting the resource from something that would normally be a resource, and that's a family member, that's a church, or that's a youth program, or a social services. How many people are representing faith-based organizations today? Like, are you a faith-based organization? A few, a church, a congregation? Who? Okay. And then who are like maybe like just nonprofit healthcare providers, or you're working in fields? Okay. All right. What about the remainder? School districts. Okay. I'm coming from a place where I came out of the church working as a youth pastor and a pastor of outreach into a nonprofit sphere. One thing that I did experience as a youth pastor is the purity movement. Who remembers the purity movement? Remember the purity movement, True Love Waits, it was called. It was this kind of campaign that started in the 80s as a response to the AIDS epidemic to stop having our kids have sex because everybody's going to get sick and die. Okay? That's what they were hearing. Yeah. And so abstinence programs came, churches got curriculum, and they started saying phrases like, if you act this way, and I have a list of them here, and they're really hard for me to say because I experienced this even as a straight person being told this, that you're going to be a dirty penny being used, a used penny if you participate this. You are a chewed piece of gum. You are an unwrapped, this is when I heard the most, you're an unwrapped Christmas present, or you've been an unwrapped Christmas present. You've revealed yourself, right? And so this shame that was attached to all sexual activity became traumatizing for many youth, especially if you add on what they would say the sin of being gay. So not only are you sexually active, which is a mark against you, it's going to unwrap a little of that present, you're gay, and you're going to ruin the whole damn thing. Like, you just ruined the whole damn package.
Put the hell in a handbasket. Okay?
And that movement really saturated the conversations of what many millennials experienced growing up in a society that said this. And therefore, it rippled effect. It has a ripple effect of how LGBT youth experience language and trauma about them. And so therefore, if they did come out at a youth camp, or a summer camp, or a church youth group camp and said, I'm gay, it was a crapshoot. You might have a counselor or a youth pastor that was willing to have a conversation with you. That was rare. Most likely, they would say, ooh, there's an issue here we have to deal with. And they treated it with very bad tactics. It's probably not surprising to all know, like they would send them to other types of camps and pray the gay away, and conferences called, it was focused on the family, had a conference that loved one out. You're going to love somebody not to be gay. And they would go to these conferences and they felt like this is the way to treat this illness. As a person of faith, we have to realize the damage that we cause and the trauma that we are now having to fix, right? That we're going to have to heal from. And so when we see these increases numbers of why youth are homelessness, it's actually pretty easy to go back and look at why. And then what can we do in this room, and all the different agencies we work for, in our school districts, in our churches, in our nonprofits, in our healthcare systems, how can we realize this has happened, and how can we take a person who's experienced this, and really, gay or straight, that experienced this trauma, sexual trauma of just being told that their behavior had to do with who they are as a person, their purity, their righteousness, and their self-worth, right? And so one of the topics that we like to talk about here is sacred worth. That if we can identify everyone to have sacred worth, and we start there, in any one of those contexts, churches, camps, youth groups, then we can build on that to bring the worth back. So what are some ways, Naomi, that you have seen when we start with sacred worth, we can get back on the pathway of healing from traumatizing experiences of being told that they're not accepted?
So I think some of the things that we do is acknowledge that trauma's out there. I remember being in church and having the demon of homosexuality cast out. You know, so acknowledging that trauma exists, affirming that you are indeed worthy. Some of the things that we use when we look at minority stress theory, okay? We realize that if you have an oppressed minority and you attach more oppression on that minority, then we're dealing with a situation where we are trying to rebuild what's been broken. And we start off by acknowledging it's broken. You were hurt. The school system may have hurt you by putting you in a box that said, you need to go to a restroom, which is in the nurse's office. I've had kids that had to go to the nurse's office to go to the restroom. Kids who were not allowed to be kids. And let me tell you something about second graders. Second graders know that there is something wrong with that one second grader that has to go to the restroom and the nurse's office. They may not know that this kid was born in a different body, but they know that something is wrong. So when we bring these situations into play, and when we put kids in a circumstance, in a situation where they feel less than, when they are not enough, just being who they are, then we realize we have to rebuild that from the beginning. We start by acknowledging the trauma. We start by acknowledging that we fucked up, and we need to fix it, okay? We need to fix it. Okay? So you're okay just the way you are. God made you perfectly, and God doesn't make mistakes. So let's start there. Let's figure out how to get you back to where you're supposed to be and who you were supposed to be. We lose so much magic in these beautiful youth when we try and put them in a box. I am not exactly fond of boxes. We laugh because when I've been preaching, because we're out of a senior pastor, and I create drama wherever I go. I don't know what that's about, okay? but I create drama by saying we don't have boxes. You know, that guy in the back, right in the back of the pew, I'd like you to read the scripture. And everybody looks at me and goes, who is that guy? Who cares who that guy is? Here's the scripture, read it. You know? So we have to realize that we have to sometimes be really creative to engage these youth because they've been told that they don't belong, that they're less than. And in reality, they're enough, just the way they are. So we start out by using a lot of psychoeducation sometimes. I've been working with some youth now that are really into anime, so I'm using anime. I know nothing about anime, y'all, but I am using anime because it's what connects these youth. Dungeons and Dragons. I know nothing about Dungeons and Dragons, but if I can get you to listen and to be a part of the conversation, then I'm down. We're gonna do it. Okay, I will learn Dungeons and Dragons and anime. Okay? Because it's so important that you connect, that you find your voice. That you find your voice. When our legislative session began, I got a lot of trans families, and I was doing a lot of letters because these kids needed to go out of state to get medicine, to get surgery, to be affirmed for who they are. So I found that I was becoming one of these crazy people that said, are you kidding me? Really? Because I had a kid that went to Florida to get top surgery. Why did he have to go to Florida to get top surgery? His parents pay taxes here in Texas. But he had to go to Florida to get top surgery, 17 years old, because he had been on hormones for 2 years. And their family was so fearful that if it was done in Texas, that it would be on somebody's record somewhere. So we have to figure out ways to advocate. We have to figure, ally is what? A noun or a verb, y'all? It's a verb. It is an action word. Ally is an action word.
Like an advocate.
Yes, yes. So I love this because, you know, if you've ever been to any or saw a Pride parade, my poor mother, she went to Pride, she went to a conference in San Francisco during Pride. And she just kept shaking her head. Okay, she said, they were naked, holding signs. And I'm like, Ma. But those were not the ones that were holding up the sign that says God hates facts. So God hates these signs. You know, it's so important for us to acknowledge that when we are trying to build a young person up, we have to listen to them. And we have to acknowledge that whatever they're saying is true. And we don't put pathology behind it. You know, sometimes it's just your story. And I can listen to your story because if I listen to your story, guess what? We can change the ending. But we have to start by hearing the story. Okay, I'm not preaching. Let's go.
No, you're right on the slide.
Am I right on the slide? Okay, so James Baldwin. All right, I love James Baldwin because this is a guy who, when it was really not popular to be gay and black, because I will tell you point blank, one of the most homophobic places in the world is the black church, unless you are the choir director, and then it's okay. I'm just keeping it real, y'all, okay? If you can make the choir sing, you good. But James Baldwin says, you know, it really is, no one ever died of love, but multitudes have perished and are perishing every year in the oddest places for the lack of it. So sometimes it's just about, you know, showing a young person that, hey, I got you, I'm supporting you, you can talk to me. And they're not looking for answers, they just want to talk. And you may not have the answers, and by Naomi at PrideCenterSA.org, I will find that answer for you. You may not have the answer, but if you listen, that's usually all they really want, is someone who's listening to them.
You know, it's not an illusion of ours that a lot of the misunderstandings and divisions that come in our communities about LGBT issues is because of religion and politics after that, driven by usually religion. And the differences in the theologies that exist in our societies. And one thing that I think sometimes when we speak as progressives probably,
Pretty sure.
They say, well, you're just taking away the Bible. You're just throwing away the theology, and that should matter, right? That theology should matter, and I do agree that it should matter. And so one of the points of healing I believe that we have to take place is to really create honest and good theology around our systems, in our places of worship, in our camps, or in our faith-based institutions, to better understand the true theology of sacred worth, of each of us, our divinity, and start from a place of healing. There are very few texts about LGBT issues in the Bible. There's just a handful. There's great slides out there and presentations out there, usually called something like For the Bible Tells Me So.
Yes.
And there's even a documentary about it. And it just talks maybe like about the issue of Sodom and Gomorrah. That's in the Bible, right? I mean, heck, we have a word about it, right, from that text.
Yeah.
And that one verse has created a lot of trauma through theological language, right? When that text, when I read it, is about rape, right? When everybody in this room understands how much trauma that exists around rape. But we have made that about sexual gender identification, sexual preference, except about actually what's really the worst thing about that story is sexual abuse, right? So I really think as people in a community to correctly look at good theology, to form around sacred worth matters. So we're not throwing out the importance of sacred texts, or scriptures, or the Word of God, or evangelical language of inclusion, where it actually says, if you're evangelical, that you are made in the image of God, right? We really believe that. How can we create good theology of acceptance so that the trauma exists less for those in the LGBTQ community, to make it easier for those who are attending your school districts and your healthcare providers, to make it easier to treat? We all experience trauma. And if we can help reduce that trauma through theological acceptance, it matters. And so I don't want to get that lost in there, because it's the root of why we are talking today. It is. It's hard to say, because I know that in this conference before, there's a lot of faith-based circles, and so we wanted to be honest and open about how the faith-based communities have affected the trauma in this situation, and how we can get out of it, and how we can use healing to help reduce the trauma that we did see exacerbated during COVID-19 in all forms of inclusion and seclusion that happens in the LGBT community. So I did want to hit on that as we continue on in our slides, and we're going to end with let's end with this video, and then maybe open it up for some questions.
Trying to think, there's nothing else on there.
No, because, and it's so important, and language does matter. There is an inclusive Bible, which I think is so cool, because I am very big on language. I spend a great deal of time just doing Say So 101, where we just talk about vocabulary. And I literally can tell you that vocabulary will change by the time I finish the slideshow. Because it's a moving thing. And that's why when I talk about pronouns, when I talk about God the Creator, Mother, Father, when I talk about the fact that I don't know what your relationship is with your family, so I'm going to assume that you tell me what your pronouns are. And it's not preferred. These are your pronouns. It is sexual orientation. Sexual preference is what we do in bed, okay? Not who we do it with. So acknowledging that language matters. That language is one of the most important things that we can bring youth that allow them to be who they are. You know, and as we see, especially in high school, we're seeing a lot more non-binary youth, and acknowledging that, you know what, we, in the United States, we are one of the few countries that just has male and female. Okay, if you go to Europe, binaries can go, you can have 8 million genders, okay? India has 8. So we get stuck in this box where we feel the need to classify each other. I always tell the story, you know, we're not all Beyonce. You know, some of us could be just the girl that does not know where makeup is. You know? But does that make her any less of a female? No. No, so when we classify, remembering that language matters. that inclusive language makes me feel like I belong. That inclusive language means that you are acknowledging that who I say I am is who I am. And on Gavin's point, I had a young person tell me that the most important scripture to her was John 3:16. I said, well, tell me more about that, which is how we got the title. She says, well, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son that whosoever. And she stopped right there. She says, it gives me chills to know that I'm a whosoever. I got this young queer black girl telling me she's a whosoever, and I'm like, I'm in tears. I'm like, really? I said, it is amazing that you found that. So each and every one of us is a whosoever. You know, and to know that I am a whosoever in all my queerness and all my drama gives me the joy of knowing that I can walk you through the journey to find your whosoever too. Because it's important that we are there just to walk with them. They will find a way, but they just need to know that we believe they can find it. And a lot of times, if everybody has told you you can't find a way, you don't know what you're doing, girl, please, you better put on a skirt. No. If we can find a way to say, hey, you are a whosoever, let's talk more about that. What does that mean to you? How does that make you feel when you realize that you are perfect just the way you are, that there's nothing wrong with you? So we're able to work through that trauma. We're able to find ways to get out of our primal brain, which wants to fight, flight, or freeze, and get into the brain that says, you know what, wait, I do have value. I can figure this out. I can go to college, I can get married, I can have kids, I can do whatever I want to do because I exist. I am enough just the way I am. So it starts in the school, it starts in the home. It starts in the legislative session. It starts in all those places, and we can't forget that. There is value in our language, and our language needs to be inclusive. So I always tell folks, when someone is using a pronoun such as they or them, and you're having a hard time with it, put it right at the light switch. So every time you turn on the light, you'll see it, and it'll connect a change in your brain. And it's one of those easy ways, I've actually done trainings, it's one of those easy ways for us to learn how to use different pronouns. Every time I turn on the light, I see they and them, and I remember, they, her pronoun is they. And then I go, hey, pronoun is they, and mess it up, and I'm like, they, the pronoun is they. And that's okay.
Yeah.
If you mess up, you apologize and keep moving. Okay? But if you mess up 3 times in a row, I know you're doing it on purpose.
And we have to remember that these youth that have grown up in the last, and I'm going to say 30 years, 40 years, their life has been a debate on TV, in discussions, in churches. Churches have split over them. Institutions that existed for thousands of years have now split over a person, right? And so therefore we have to allow kindness and acceptance to overrule theological debate or any type of debate, right? Discussions and differences are going to happen all throughout our societies. They will continue and continue and continue. Fair. Things need to be discussed and always looked at. However, it should never be big enough and powerful enough to eliminate acceptance and kindness and grace and the things that we should hold each of us, with honor, right? In the beginning, God created male and female. I hear it all the time. It was Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. All right? Hear it a lot as a pastor. Here's the thing about that text in the Hebrew language. There's no and ever written in the Hebrew. It says it in your English versions. It says it, and there's not even punctuation. Like there's not even, it's a really complex thing. So you're allowing a debate of a text that can cause trauma in somebody's life, where really that phrase can be best understood as a mannerism. Okay. Has anybody lost their remote control? Okay, everybody has. And you say the phrase, man, I have looked for that remote control high and low in my house, and I couldn't find it. You actually didn't look at the highest place. You didn't look at the lowest place. Where did you look? Everywhere else. God created male and female. it's an expression. So that topic is debatable in theology. Okay, we'll never resolve it, right? So we can have one way to view that text or not. You can either agree with what I just said or disagree. And you can have that understanding in peace and love. But are we going to allow that debate, that one sentence that is complex, with full of uncertain punctuation and language and historical languages that are not even said anymore today, are we going to allow that to dictate the trauma that many people experience? And so that's, as a pastor, what is more important to me, is now allowing those types of debates to overshadow what really matters. And I think we can start getting over these great topics that divide us, because our division over this topic is creating the trauma that these youth are experiencing. That is it. And so therefore, let's not get us into that place. Let's honor people where they're at, so the trauma is less. It's not going to go away. Claudia here is a harm reduction specialist in San Antonio. She's a trans woman from El Paso. She has done harm reduction for 20 years in Juarez and El Paso, now here in San Antonio. And I love about the word harm reduction is it's not harm elimination. Okay, we're not going to be able to do it. What she's providing is harm reduction for people experiencing drug abuse. And the tactics that we use are hopefully going to reduce the harm of people's lives. So how can we see this as the same idea? That we're going to go out into the world and we're going to build relationships with people on the street experiencing homelessness, those in the LGBTQ community. We're going to build relationships where we're aiming and hoping that by our language and the way we speak and treat each other will increase the chances where harm is reduced. And I think we can all come, regardless of our theological differences, to that conclusion that less harm is good. And how can we get there? And I think we're going to play this video about how to be a good ally. Then we're going to take questions, and she's going to answer everyone now. Hopefully you can hear this.
Hey friends, so I'm trying something different with my setup, and I don't know if it's working, but you will deal. Imagine your friend is building a house, and they ask you to help, but you've never built a house before. So it'd probably be a good idea for you to put on some protective gear and listen to the person in charge. Otherwise, someone's gonna get seriously hurt. Look, I'm helping! It's the exact same idea when it comes to being an ally. An ally is a person that wants to fight for the equality of a marginalized group that they're not a part of. We need your help building this house, but you probably should listen so you know what to do first. Let's do this. So here are my 5 tips for being a good ally. Understand your privilege. Now, a lot of people get hung up on the word privilege, so let me break it down for you nice and easy. Privilege does not mean that you are rich, that you have an easy life, that everything's been handed to you and you've never had to struggle or work hard. All it means is that there are some things in life that you will not experience or ever have to think about just because of who you are. It's kind of like those horses that have those blinders on. They can see just fine. There's just a whole bunch of stuff on the side that they don't even know exists. So for example, there are currently 29 states where you can legally be fired for being gay, and there are 34 states where you can legally be fired for being trans. Now, as a straight cis woman, those are things that I don't have to ever think about if I don't want to. I'm not going to be fired because I'm straight, and I'm not going to be fired because I'm a cis. So it makes sense that before I can fight for the rights of others, I have to understand what rights I have and others don't. That's privilege. Listen and do your homework. It sounds like a no-brainer, but it's not possible for you to learn if you aren't willing to listen. So you gotta know when to zip up the lip up. I don't know. You get what I mean. But that's the thing that's so cool about social media. There are so many people sharing their stories all around the world and connecting with people that they normally would never get a chance to without the power of the internet. So do your homework. Start reading blogs, tweets, news articles, and stories so that you can get caught up on the issues that are important to the communities that you want to support. Speak up. But not over. If the Fight for Equality was a girl group, the ally wouldn't be the lead singer or the second lead singer. They'd be Michelle. An ally's job is to support. You want to make sure that you use your privilege and your voice to educate others, but make sure to do it in such a way that does not speak over the community members that you're trying to support or take credit for things that they are already saying. This isn't Mario Kart. Stay in your lane. Realize that you're going to make mistakes and apologize when you do. Nobody's perfect. Unlearning problematic things takes time and work, so you are bound to mess up and trip and fall. But don't worry, you can brush yourself off and get right back up. And back up! Just remember that it's not about your intent, it's about your impact. So when you get called out, make sure to listen, apologize, commit to changing your behavior, and move forward. Last but certainly not least, actually the most important thing on this list is remember that ally is a verb. Saying you're an ally is not enough. You gotta do the work. 1 through 4. 1 through 4. As always, there are links in the video description box to some of the things I mentioned in this video, along with some resources that have been really helpful for me as I've gone along in my journey to be more conscious. So I want to hear from you in the comments. What are some sites that you suggest checking out, and what are some things that have helped you become a better ally? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you when I see you. Bye!
So needless to say, you can tell I work a lot with students and youth, right? Because they are very social media savvy. So it's important to find a way to connect. And if you do your research and pay attention, you really can find a way to connect. Hey, I'm doing anime. I know nothing about anime, okay? But I do know that I have youth who can now tell me their emotions as based on what the anime doll is doing for them today. So that's important. That's important. So we are going to take questions. Yeah. If y'all don't have any, that means we did a great job.
No, we did a terrible job.
Naomi,
Yes.
could you share a little bit about the allied training that y'all provide?
Sure. At the Pride Center, we do a 2-hour and a 4-hour training. The 4-hour training is the more extensive training. Our trainings are usually based on what group we're working with. So if I'm working with counselors, we just run for Laurel Ridge, or all the staff of Laurel Ridge. That's going to be different from the one I do for a school district. We also do training that is, I do a lot of training on this privilege to be a trans ally. You know, that's not my experience. And if a trans person can speak, I'm going to shut up. But if you go at my trans sibling with venom, then I'm going to jump in and we're going to both kick your butt. So it's one of those things where we talk about how to use what you have to be who you are. And like I said, it's Naomi at pridecentersa.org. I think it's written on a bathroom wall somewhere. I get emails from all, hi Naomi, somebody gave me your name. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. Oh, what can I do for you? Okay. I mean, it's one of those things where if you go to Pride Center and go info, you know, it'll come to me also.
And that ally training really matters.
Yeah.
I did a study 15 years ago with Trinity University. Actually, one of the reasons I met Ann was she was part of that too. And they interviewed people involved in homelessness. And it was freshmen from Trinity University conducting this. And they said the city of San Antonio, most of these are pretty good at level 2, 3, 4 trauma care. Those are experts. So the more we are trained to better understand our population, homelessness or otherwise, as you see yourself as citizens of this town or community, wherever you live, as an avenue for level 1 trauma healing. So if you do an ally training, right, and you can better understand, and then you have a conversation in your work or on just running them into the grocery store or wherever, you know, and you're trained in how to respond appropriately and find out this youth is homeless, how can you be a part of that healing and get them connected to a level 2, 3, 4 trained social worker, whatever, who can get them into housing, right, like the Thrive Center or places in Haven for Hope or Fiesta Youth. But if you are trained in that, most people are going to get introduced through level 1 trauma care, which is in each and every one in this room. Maybe y'all actually might be level 2, 3, 4. But if we can get be trained in this, if we can get our congregations and people we know who are laity be trained in allied care, we will actually start succeeding in getting houseless youth off the streets and onto some forms of safe housing. Because each of us will now be better understood at how to care for that trauma they are experiencing. So these things are not just, I'm taking an allied course because I really want that certificate on my wall because I'll look woke, you know? Like, it's about like being effective, and when you're introduced into that trauma, you're going to actually help the situation at hand, which is we have a high increase of homeless youth on the streets of San Antonio. And you're going to meet them in the most natural places. right? And so if we're trained in this, we'll be able to get them and lead them to the right path. And it starts with level 1 care, which is not professional care. It's how to be a good citizen.
And remember, we still have a lot of youth who find housing through survival sex.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's still a thing, you know? And as we reach out and as we realize that this is each one reach one, you know, it really does take a village. And sometimes that village is the one that says, you know, this kid's been sleeping on my couch for 3 nights. Let me figure out what's going on here. Yeah? Sometimes it's just that simple. It's just that simple. Somebody to talk to. Yes?
A question you were talking about, getting them the medical help they need, especially now here in Texas.
Yeah.
My daughter's going through hormone replacement therapy, and that's been a huge burden. And I mean, even with what I do, I mean, I'm a paramedic. You should get your help wherever you need it. That's what I'm here for.
So, and what's one of
get away from
one of the things that I think is really interesting. Do you know that Planned Parenthood does hormone therapy?
No.
They do, but it's really hard.
It's really hard to get in. We have the Kind Clinic. So we offer case management, but what it comes down to is the ones who are allowed to transition and have lives that mimic what they want their lives to look like usually have privilege behind them. You know, everybody can't take their kid to Florida to get top surgery. You know, so I have to acknowledge that that's what we're looking at here. But I also have to acknowledge that if we don't say something, you know, we do have a list of providers that will take our youth. We also have therapists that will walk them through the process. We have case management that will walk them through connecting them to resources. But do we have enough of that stuff? Absolutely not. You know, I am constantly writing grants to get more folks in to be able to help. But it is a process of acknowledging that when we find something out, or when I find out that we do have a good provider in the community, I'm sending folks their way. You know, almost every qualified, and I am a queer and trans affirming provider, so I've done extra training in that. But almost every single provider who actually has that training also probably now has a wait list.
Where can we get that kind of training?
So there are a couple of places where you can get that training, and I'm going to tell you, just really send me an email at the Pride Center, and I will point you in those directions.
Your email again?
It's Naomi at PrideCenterSA.org. If you go to the Pride Center, I will come up.
I have a transgender granddaughter,
Mm-hmm.
and she's 11.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, the family has been very supportive, been loving. And
That's exciting.
She's amazing.
Yes.
Jessie is amazing. I worry about everything else around her.
Absolutely.
That's what
Absolutely. We have a group that goes out of the center. It's a Trans Ally Support Group, and it's for parents who have trans kids. And the parents just sit down and talk. And the parents that run the group have trans kids.
Okay.
So one of them also happens to be a social worker, which is good. But it is a group of just folks who have a shared experience.
She was afraid that if her parents proceeded with trying to get her what she needed, that the police were going to come and arrest her.
Absolutely, I get that all the time. I mean, literally. And I have 8 students right now, 4 social work students and 4 counseling students. And I actually have a folder that pulls out what is real and what isn't. Because as a social worker, I'm not calling APS or CPS on a parent who's doing gender affirming care. Take me to jail, okay? We'll start a wonderful revolution, because I'm all about revolution, y'all. So yeah, no, but it takes parents standing up and saying, I love my kid. And it's interesting that you don't want my child to learn sex education in school or anything about race, period. But you think you can tell me how to parent when it comes to gender affirming care. Okay? It's just amazing what things are important and what things aren't. You can ban books, but you can't tell me how to raise my kid. Yes?
How would you tell somebody, so I'll just be very blunt about it. I know I'm female, I don't feel any different from that. How do you explain to somebody else the importance of identity or pronouns
Okay, so let's say you had a box, and outside of the box it said refrigerator, okay? But inside the box there was a stove. And you kept trying to keep things cold in this box that said stove, okay? So outside of the box says refrigerator, but that's not what's inside. Inside of the box there's something totally different. I often think that gender is what's in our heads. Okay? Sex is between your legs. This is all y'all are getting. Ally Training 101. Sex is between your legs. Gender is in between your ears. Okay? Love is in your heart. So if I am telling you that my brain is female, my body is male, it's my brain that really is running things here. So if I do not work to get my brain to match my body, I will always feel some sense of dysphoria about this doesn't work. This is not who I am. And I will go as far as to say this is not who God meant me to be because I have a male brain. And if you put that out there in a way that the brain and body do not match, there's a stove inside that refrigerator box. You can try as hard as you want to freeze something, it ain't gonna work. But if you try and cook it, then you're working in the right direction. So it really is simple as the brain and body don't match. And until you get those two in a symbiotic relationship, you're always going to not be complete. And I will, tell me who it is, I'll talk to him. Yes.
One more quick question.
One more quick question, yes.
Do y'all provide that ally training outside of your?
Yes, we do. We do it in the community, we do it in, yes.
In Kendall County, versus.
Yes.
Oh, where are you at?
Training, Kendall County.
We've actually done training as far as TCU. We've gone out to Dallas and done training.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So how many people, do you have like a number of people you prefer to be in the class?
I've actually got to kick it over to my director, my ED. Okay, but if you will just get in touch with the Pride Center, we will work it out.
Yeah, and there's other organizations in
Yeah.
Kendall County, in Kerr County, PFLAG, other organizations that do that. They have them in Kerr County. So there are places that you can connect to. Last word.
Last word. Okay. Ally is what?
A bird.
A verb. Okay. Ally is a verb. And God is a God of love. It was the only new commandment we were given, was to love one another.
And the love, in that love that exists, right, in differences. If we exclude somebody because we disagree with them for some reason, like we're going to exclude you from this community, right? You're taking a part of God away in a solution. Claudia, in her harm reduction, I'm going to give her props. Her team, which she leads, just about 4 of them, have taken 2,000 needles, they've given 2,000 safe needles to clients in need and taken away 53,000 dirty needles. They've overdosed, reversed people, meaning they were dying and they're no longer dying, 246 people in the community in the last 6 months. She's sent 52 people to detox and sent 172 people who addicted to substances into treatment. If we said to Claudia, you cannot be in Corazon based on your identity because this is a faith-based organization, these numbers would be worse, right? So, do not allow our differences. And I'll say this, if you're a liberal, excluding some conservative in your life because you don't think they're speaking to you,
Keep talking to them.
we were all in this together. And so if we're going to reduce harm in our communities, we're going to have to work together and not allow our differences to be more important than the success of everybody taking harm away from our community. That goes both ways. I work in a very progressive church and have to remind my progressives all the time that it goes both ways. And so please, don't think this is one-sided. We're all in this together despite our differences.
And I believe in brave spaces. Brave spaces mean we don't have to agree, but we're going to talk. Okay? Because that's how change happens.